I'm joined by our chief foreign editor, Rob Parson. So, Rob, what happened? The Russian candidate was meant to be a shoo-in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a surprise, because certainly in the days before, most people were saying, it looks like Mr. Prokopchuk is going to get the post. The British, for instance, were saying that it's almost a done deal. But clearly, behind the scenes, there was a lot of opposition, and particularly over the last 24 hours or so from the Americans. And that, it seems, may have turned the tide. But bear in mind that it's the Americans who provide most of the financing for Interpol, at least 10% of it. Others, big contributors include Japan, Germany, and France. You know, three countries that weren't particularly sympathetic to the Russian general either. So I think those factors were the most important. And at the last minute, people just look, we know which side our bread is buttered. There's so much opposition coming towards the Russian candidate, it's not really worth going after, sticking with the Russian candidate. Plus, I think the Russians may have thought, well, is it really worth making a big issue of this? After all, the president of the Interpol is largely a ceremonial position. The main post is the Secretary General, who's a post occupied by a German, Jürgen Stock, at the moment. His position comes up next year, 2019. Perhaps the Russians are looking ahead to that and thinking, maybe that's the post we should be really going for, because it's rather more influential than the president.
And why was there so much hostility to the Russian choice from the US and other countries?
Well, I think largely it's about the system of red notices and the feeling that certain countries, among them Russia, misuse the red notice system, which is essentially like an international arrest warrant system. So, for instance, if you're in Russia, you want somebody arrested who you say has committed a crime in Russia, you apply via Interpol using a red notice to get that person arrested in another country and then extradited back to your country. In particular, there were two cases involving the British financier of American origin, Bill Browder, who back in the 90s made a lot of money in Russia, but also is responsible for getting the Magnitsky Act into place in the United States Congress, targeting key Russian figures with sanctions. In other words, a man not particularly loved inside Russia. They went after him on at least two occasions for red notices, were pushed back by Interpol, because Interpol says you cannot use red notices if there's a political, military, racial, or ethnic interest involved. And on two occasions they tried, were pushed back because it was felt that the motivation was political rather than criminal. So I think there's this feeling that it would not be good for the image of Interpol to have a country as the president occupying the presidency, when so many other countries around the world regard Russia as what you might call a non-rule of law state, in which the law tends to apply rather less than political influence.
Thank you very much, Rob.